Hello again and welcome to the Music Ally Focus podcast with me, Music Ally's editor, Joe Sparrow. And in this episode, we're joined by multi-award-winning, 2 times UK beatbox champion and live looping pioneer Beardyman, who, like a number of artists, has created a significant extra income stream via the subscription model using Patreon. We talked to him about how he's made Patreon work as an indie artist. Now, what's this Focus podcast? Well, Music Ally, as you know, provides an analysis-rich and contextual guide to the music business. And each of these Focus episodes analyzes one meaningful story at a time. This podcast is also going to be quick. It's going to take roughly about the same amount of time as it would take André Ortolf of Germany, hypothetically at least, to eat 45 kilos of jelly, or jello for our American listeners, blindfolded with no hands. Andre ate just under 1.5 kilos of jelly face down in 2016. And I think it's important to relay that the Guinness Book of Records notes that Andre ate commercially available green jelly for the attempt, suggesting perhaps that this is something you may wish to try at home. Now, talking of doing something that makes a lot of unusual noises with your mouth, award-winning beatboxer Beardyman, aka Darren Foreman, or Daz Foreman, if you want to be very familiar, which I was with him, has created a Patreon model where fans don't merely support him, they collaborate with him. Subscribers have the chance to present their track ideas and collaborate directly with Beardyman, and if successful, get royalties on the track. So he tells us about how and why he set up this new direct-to-fan community connection, how it has become a big part of his income, how a Discord server is vital to the whole program, and why he chose to only offer highly affordable pricing, and how he collaborates with the fans after all of that. He also has some very, let's say, strong opinions on some technologies like streaming platforms and how they pay their artists, and NFTs, but we focus specifically on the use of Patreon-like funding models alongside streaming income. Let's get on with the interview now. So, very happy to welcome Beardyman, aka Darren, aka Daz Foreman, to the Focus podcast to talk about his use of Patreon and how it's sort of empowering and funding unique forms of fan-artist engagement. Hello, Beardyman/Daz/Darren.
It is a joy to be here. I look forward to giving you the knowledge of my brain.
I am looking forward to this as well. Now, can you, just for the benefit of our listeners, sort of do the sort of nutshell thing of introducing yourself briefly, who you are, what you do, and how it all works? I realise that's a life philosophy in a couple of sentences, but I'm sure you can do it.
The details of my life are quite inconsequential. I started off as a beatboxer about 20 years ago, won the National Beatbox Championships, used it as a platform to gain reach and use the early Web 2.0 tech to get my weird music out into the open. Never really thought I'd be a musician when I was growing up because my parents actively dissuaded me against it, and I believed them that it wasn't a career. They were probably right in retrospect. Went on to go from beatboxing to looping and sort of helped be one of the pioneers of that. Because I wanted to move away from the sort of novelty of beatbox. It's, people only like it in sort of 3-minute bursts and then it becomes kind of tedious and a bit of a one-trick pony. Looping also is a bit of a one-trick pony, so I branched out from there to more kind of live production, sort of technology-rich pursuits where I'm sort of finding more ways just to get the weird shit in my head out into the world. Can I swear on this? Am I allowed?
Yeah, go.
Okay, great. Yeah, the shit in my head out into the world. So, I don't know. I had a big hit in like 20, whatever the fuck it was, with Eat, Sleep, Rave, Repeat with Norman Cook and Calvin Harris, which was a bizarre brush with the mainstream. I've released a couple of albums, but I've sort of, I don't know. I'm sort of allergic to much of the process of album making because it drives me a bit nuts. So I prefer to improvise instead. And yeah, I've sort of bucked some music industry trends just because I guess I'm just too ADD to really focus on anything in particular. And then recent years, I had kids, and then there was a pandemic, so I've not really done anything other than streaming and working on tech and focusing on streaming and kind of embracing the ephemeral nature of improvised live music and using streaming platforms as in like live streaming platforms as a medium to kind of get the shit in my head into other people's heads.
There to the world. And your music is very it's based around creating things live in the moment around your voice and with technology, and so that must suit these kind of streaming platforms pretty well, I guess. And I will put a link below the podcast to one of your recent shows, which you posted on your Patreon and was really, really good because I've watched it. Now, you're using Patreon, and I guess this has come around, it's developed through this period of finding an alternative way to connect with the audience. You say that you're on the Patreon that you're running, you're creating the most interactive music and music tech community in the world, which is a nice, bold claim. And
superlatives
I like.
Sell. Superlatives sell. It's not,
There's no point underselling yourself, is there? So it's a Patreon model, but bearing in mind that your music is sort of hyper creative and very interactive. Can you explain how you're using Patreon and what's on there for fans, what they get out of it, what you get out of it?
It's a very normal Patreon in most respects in that it fits the Patreon model where you have sort of 3 tiers. A lower one gives you kind of broad, cheap access to anything and everything that I create, apart from some stuff, which I wall away and give only to the next tier up, which is the technical tier, where I share some of the techniques that I use, technologically speaking, artistically speaking, with people who want to emulate the kind of stuff I'm doing, which is a value proposition of a kind of pedagogical nature. And then there's a third tier, which I actually had to delist, which I'll explain why in a minute. But it's because I got basically the third tier is, I call it the inner circle tier, and it was supposed to be, it's £15 a month. So it's £4 a month for the cheaper one. This is how it was anyway. It was £4 a month for the cheaper one, £10 a month for the technical tier one, where it's kind of of a pedagogical nature, and it's sharing tips and tricks with the community and all that kind of stuff. And then there's the £15 a month one, where you get access to even more stuff, even more odds and ends. And one of the things I offered there was a bespoke song if you'd been a patron for a year, but I just couldn't fulfill it, because even though I do make stuff fast, I want to keep the quality high, and I got like 100 of these, and I was like, I can't do 100 songs of a good quality anyway. I could like shit them out and do 100, so, but even that takes time, and I'm quite time poor. Like I said, I've got 3 kids. I've got things to do. I've got like art to make and like reach to attain. I can't be spending.
I mean, being a victim of your own success is not the worst thing in the world.
Well, no, it was just poor planning, I think, in my first implementation of it. I mean, it did well. It's paying my mortgage and bills and stuff. Yeah. But I had to delist that tier. I mean, you on Patreon, it's quite good. You can limit the number of places on a given tier. And I should have thought it through better and restricted it. But at the time, I think I was kind of desperate because it was pandemic. All my shows were cancelled or delayed indefinitely. So I just decided, well, it's Patreon or bust, really. So, which is a lot of artists did. So, it became a really useful creative community and sort of artistic vector and sort of financial crutch and saved my life, really. But yeah, I've since redesigned the tier structure so that now it's just 2 tiers. There's one that's £6 and you get sort of everything there apart from the technical knowledge stuff, which is £10 still. So I removed that upper tier.
And I guess that's sort of a recognition of the nature of your fan base, isn't it? That you've got people who are fans of your work, and then you've got people who are fans of your work, and also of the. And I'm not blowing smoke here. Your amazing technical prowess as you're performing, right?
You. So you're so
nice. But the sort of the technical side that they also want. If you've ever scratched the surface of any of these kind of music tech forums, that everyone's obsessed with knowing the detail of how you do this and how you. So you're providing that for extra value, and I'm sure, and people are sort of keen to do that, I guess.
Yeah, I think it's a very common thing on Patreon, where I think the notion of an artist is morphing slowly into a more sort of complex gestalt of pedagogue and performer. So you can see it happening on YouTube with people like Ben Jordan, for example, who is the flashbulb, who was making weird breakcore, 15 years ago, and has gone through multiple different styles. And then he discovered that doing YouTube videos was gaining him more recognition in the music. But then doing YouTube videos where he's like commenting on issues he cares about in the music industry, doing really well-informed content about technology, reviews of tech and stuff like this, but with his own spin. And then that ends up parlaying into further reach for his actual music.
The key here is you understanding your community and your community of fans actively wanting to support and engage with you. They're not being members of Patreon because they feel that they should support you. They want to do it. It's a sort of quite a fluid dynamic here. So I want to move on in a minute to sort of have this new project that you're doing, which really sort of strongly engages with your community. But on that basic level, how does Patreon allow you to encourage and engage with your community and sort of bring them tighter? Because what we're seeing so much at the moment is partially fueled by the pandemic, is artists wanting to really, really strengthen that relationship in a very direct way and make it very two-way.
I mean, I don't know. The notion of connection with fans has changed fundamentally since the internet came along. You can't hide anymore. You know, gone are the days when you could be a kind of unreachable artistic entity. People crave closeness, and you can sell that closeness. It's a parasocial relationship that you're selling on any of these platforms. It's weird. It's a new world of like fan creator dynamic where, you know, part of the unaccessibility was part of the allure in the 80s, let's say, you know, when there were sort of mega ultra hyperstars like Prince and Jacko and stuff like that. But that's sort of gone, you know. You're expected to be accessible, and most people want to be. You actually have to go out of your way now to sort of wear a mask, which many people do now. There's more artists who wear masks than ever before. And because you sort of have to. You have to protect your identity if you don't want to be known. You only want to be known by your art. But in terms of Patreon being a financial remuneration mechanism, I feel like my hand is forced, along with every other person who started a Patreon. Patreon's amazing. Like, I mean, Patreon's not the only one. There's like Ko-fi is another one. There's a bunch of others. I mean, I think Patreon is by far the best, and it's the original. Jack Conte, who runs it, is a legend for all kinds of reasons. Like, he himself was a creator. Like, he started Patreon a few years ago now because he was making these YouTube videos. They changed something in the algorithm, and he found that he'd been spending hours and hours and hours on this content. He was never going to earn what he felt this content was worth. And then he set Patreon up as a response to streaming services. So Spotify lost $194 million last year. It's a model that doesn't even work for Spotify, let alone the artists. So, yeah, Patreon was set up by Jack Conte as a response to that, because he was doing fine selling albums on iTunes. He'd do some video to some song, a cover or an original song or whatever. It would do well on YouTube, and then he would sell singles and albums on iTunes. And then music streaming came along and destroyed that model. So now artists just can't earn money from music. You just can't. So you have to go out and play live. And that's quite hard. That's life on the road. That doesn't suit everyone's lifestyle. And it's actually, there's high margins. Slim margins because it's high costs. Sorry. So, it's not a great model for everyone. It's a bit of a slog. So, yeah, Patreon was set up for that reason. And I think without Patreon, there would be immense suffering amongst artists, and people would just not be able to put the time in to make the art. Spotify's a problem. Spotify's a huge problem. And it's the worst of the bunch. Because, and probably people listening to this, there might be some people that work for Spotify, but
yes,
yeah, but like, don't get me wrong, like, please continue to playlist my stuff. It's just that, like, you know, we all know what Spotify is, and it's a grab by the majors to sort of secure their hold over the industry and justify their existence. I mean, that sounds scathing, and my manager's going to kill me for being this down on Spotify, but like, it's not helping artists. Like, you have to get lots and lots and lots and lots of streams to earn a living off Spotify. And Spotify's not been made, and none of the streaming services have, but Spotify's the worst of them. They're not made in order to benefit musicians, no matter what anyone says. I mean, that's common knowledge. You know, musicians are this resource that they use to get their raw material, and it's not fair, it's not okay, and it necessitates the existence of Patreon. And so I'm happy to use Patreon because actually the model is much more based on kindness and charity and passion. And it genuinely is.
And that's about that fan relationship again. Do you think that?
Yeah.
One thing that fans are now is that, weirdly, they're sort of quite well educated on the realities of the music industry, and they know how they've heard artists saying, "Oh, I don't think I'm making enough money from streaming." They've read news stories about the recent government inquiry in the UK into the economics of music streaming. They understand I think this is remarkable. Taylor Swift fans understand what master recordings are and why it's important for the artists that the artist may want to own them. There's things that I would never have thought about or known about when I was a sort of teenage fan, for example. But do you think that part of then, obviously they get something out of the joining your Patreon, they get exclusive access. But do you think that you're talking about kindness and sort of community? Do you think that's part of it then, that they want to make sure that they are paying you directly?
Yeah, well, because it's so. Yeah, I think a large part of the Patreon model is about essentially charity. It's like the same as if you saw someone busking on the street and what they were playing really connected with you. You feel obliged to give them money. There's social pressure to do so. It makes you feel good to do so. You want to help them. Like you feel there's pity there. You're like, oh my God, this person's playing next to a tube station. They shouldn't be doing that. They deserve better than this. Their music's beautiful. It moved me. Here's a quid. It's no different to that. It's just that it can happen at scale. And there's nothing wrong with that. So people like Amanda Palmer, who are sort of early adopters of this kind of thing, I'm happy to be an exemplar for it as well, because there's no shame in it. And there's especially no shame in it when you consider that the pandemic showed everyone just how fragile playing live is as a source of income, and it necessitated it for a lot of people. And actually, the existence of Spotify also just necessitates it. I didn't do it for a long time because I had precedent in being in the music industry, and I was like, oh, I'm not begging for change. Turns out, firstly, it feels great because you get actual direct contact with your fans, which you might think would be weird and creepy. It's actually fine. Like, you're just managing a community of people who are very similar to you. They like your stuff.
How difficult is it to ask for fans for financial support in that sense? And I mean, from your perspective as an individual, you said you initially found it, perhaps you didn't want to do it, but also from the perspective of the fans responding.
I mean, it's sort of fine. It's just something you get over when you're just like, I mean, like, so if you run a podcast, for example, which, I mean, I don't know what your situation is with funding on this, but most podcasts have...
Ready for sponsors, yeah.
Right, yeah. So you have paid advertising at the beginning, and there's like a pay scale where if you, the host, mention a product by name and do a little spiel about it, then that's worth a lot more because people are more likely to buy something when it comes as a recommendation from the voice that they trust. Or you can have the ads in the middle, ads at the beginning, ads at the end. This is no different. It's like, if you're on Patreon, you're not selling someone else's product, you're selling your own. So, I mean, I don't know. A part of me thinks 'twas ever thus. You always, if you're a musician, had to be something of a marketeer. You have to sell your own mythos. The geniuses of it, like Prince, he was as good at being his own PR as he was, controlling his visibility and his mythos, as he was at all the instruments he played and the production that he did. And
so is it now just sort of hyper transparent? Like you're saying, look, I'm an artist. Of course, an artist needs to pay the rent and survive. So you pay me, I'll give you this, and we all have better lives because of it.
Exactly. Like, yeah.
And so,
precisely.
Can we talk about then your project is talking of transparency is called Milking the Community. So. You're not really leaving much off the table here. So, which is good, I guess, and obviously your community are responding well to this. So, what is Milking the Community, and how is it a bit different in the sense of what you are asking your community to do and what you provide in return?
So, I had this £15 a month tier, which promised people a bespoke song. I am still going through the backlog of these. It got to the point where I thought, do you know what? I think I can comfortably raise the price of this because there's more of this than I can cope with. But then I started to think, why am I going to charge anyone more than that per month? Who are these people that can that can pay that per month? It started to sort of irk me that I would do that. And the reason why it bothered me charging people more than, say, £15 a month was because over the pandemic, looking after this community, growing this community, getting to know these people, because we're talking on Discord, I'm sucking their voices into the music that I'm making as I make it live. We're having banter, we're saving each other from insanity during the pandemic when we're all locked in our houses. I know these people now. I never saw that coming. And I got to the point where I was like, oh, this is great. I'm going to charge £40 a month for these bespoke songs or more. And they'll each get a bespoke vinyl and I'll offer them a share of the recording revenues. And that's a really strong proposition. And I started to think of ways to deliver on that, but then I couldn't find a good price point for it. And me and my manager were going backwards and forwards and we're thinking, how the fuck do we price this? If I'm going to do this, you're sort of stuck with this big sort of matrix of things to connect and find a useful nexus between them. Like, where's the price point? Is it £1,000 a song? Because it's going to take time to make these. Like, if I'm going to make them, I'm going to spend time on them. I'm going to turn them public facing. I'm going to want to spend time on them. That's going to take time away from doing other things. So that then becomes my next album project. But then I have to take all of their requests, and some of their requests might be shit. So do I want to do that necessarily? And then I'm like, well, am I comfortable charging anyone that amount of money? Who are these people going to be? Do I really want like Martin Shkreli turning up in my Patreon and saying, I've paid you, now make the song I want? That feels too much like direct patronage, as you might for a despotic ruler. So that felt kind of uncomfortable. And I was like, well, maybe this isn't such a good idea. Maybe I should just stick to the sort of more mass market pricing level of keeping it back to sort of more like charitable donations. So this is brand new territory, this kind of direct remuneration from fans, what the value proposition is, whether it's just charity or whether there is actually a deliverable at the end of it. Finding that balance is important, I think. So what I've ended up with is I've actually got rid of the £15 a month thing altogether. I've said the lowest tier is going to, instead of being £4, you don't get much for it. You can sort of join into my streams, but you don't get any of the offcuts and the secret tracks and all that crap.
I mean, it is cheap. They are affordable prices, aren't they? That you're charging. I've spoken to other artists who are doing Patreon, and obviously there's lots of different models of doing it, and they have to. What you're saying here is that they have to be right for you, the artist.
Yeah, exactly. But to just complete what the scheme actually ended up being is now the lowest tier is £6 a month, and for that you get everything except for the technical stuff, which is £10 a month. So, and the way that this remuneration thing works is that if I choose your idea, if I like it and it makes it into a track because it has been a good point of inspiration, and I do feel like that thing that you wrote to me describing the track you want, if I do it and it's good and I put it out, then you will get 10% of the royalties from the track. So, I mean, it was kind of an arse backwards way to come to the idea of doing it, but it's been a really interesting exercise in thinking through the mechanics of Patreon and what the deliverables are, whether there should indeed be any, what they should be, how you find a price point in this kind of thing. I'm not saying I've got the right idea with this. It could be that actually I should have gone for the it's £60 a month because that's how much it should cost. God knows. I don't know. It's all very new. There are people who do charge that. It's sort of about trying to find what's comfortable. And like I say, this is one iteration of a way that you can do it.
Okay, and just to jump in here, if you're finding this useful and you'd like more of this in-depth news and trusted analysis waiting for you in your inbox every morning, as well as access to all of our industry-leading reports, head on over to musically.com/subscribe. And you may be eligible for a free Music Ally subscription via our corporate and sponsored subscriptions. So if you work for a DSP, a major label, an indie label, or if you're an artist manager, an employee of a CMO or a publisher, you can check to see if it's available for you. It's musically.com/subscription-options. There's a link below the podcast to check out as well. Okay, let's go back to the interview. Yeah, I mean, you're clearly feeling your way here, and that's obviously a good way to learn and to invent new things, isn't it? So as you move forward, you'll be able to refine it and get it, quote, right. For the benefit of people listening, just to sort of sum up exactly how this works, people can pitch ideas to you, musical ideas. You pick 15 of the most inspiring ones. You create tracks. The collaborators that you took the ideas from receive 10% of the master rights, a producer credit, and a one-off dub plate vinyl of the song they created. Which is, I mean, for someone who's a huge fan, they're in sort of dreamland territory there, aren't they? And you're making that affordable, but you're getting something out of it as well. And it's you're definitely cementing lifelong fans there by doing it, aren't you? That price point is, as you said, it's complex, different for every artist. I've spoken to artists who have those very high ones, £50, £60 a month, and they provide a huge amount of things for it in return, and people are happy with it. And there's lots of different ways of doing it. Are you able to put your finger on exactly what they really want from Patreon? I mean, obviously they want to support you.
No, I'm not.
They must, right? Okay.
And I mean, I'm not at all. So I mean, it's unfortunate actually. I had a conversation with Jack Conti. He's sort of a mate now, which is brilliant because I've been a fan of his stuff for years. Like, he's one of my favorite philosophers, let alone like business owners or musicians. He's fantastic. But we had a really interesting phone exchange where I was pitching ideas to him about things to do on Patreon. One of them was an auction mechanic where I was like, how on earth are we as artists supposed to know what things are worth? Like, what I originally wanted to do with this was what the kind of thing that was happening with NFTs at the time, but I don't like Web3. I think most people distrust it at this point. And one of the things I liked about the whole Web3 NFT thing was there's an auction element. So you don't need to decide what this stuff is worth. And I wanted to do that in Patreon and have Patreon's API just provide that. But it doesn't, and Jack wasn't into the idea, which is a pity. But I mean, you can do that through eBay. He said that there was one band, was it OK Go? I can't remember. There was a band who did exactly that. They had like a tier that you could enter, and then you were then able to enter an auction, which happened through eBay for, I guess it was the kind of like Wu-Tang Martin Shkreli kind of thing. There's only a limited number of these things and you can bid for them, which that's a great way of doing it as well. Maybe I should have done that. I don't know. It's, there's so many, I mean, you can experiment. There's abundant ways to experiment with ways of distributing music, finding the value of music, creating scarcity in the form of like limited edition vinyls. I mean, I personally think NFTs are a big stinking pile of shit, but like, I think that the idea of digital scarcity can just do one. But yeah, if you've got one-off vinyls, there's a degree of kind of fetishism for physical formats, which I think is a valid form of fetishism. You've got this physical token of something that proves your allegiance to that piece of music. It's kind of a trophy to show this is how much I really care about this. It exists as a physical present. You can see the grooves on the record. There's something really nice about that. So that's a nice kind of scarcity. It's a scarcity of a physical object because physical objects really do have scarcity.
What about that? Just to sort of scratch the surface of those fans a bit then. So if it's not completely clear what they want, every fan is different. Is there a sort of, can you maybe put a grouping on the kind of fans that want to join your Patreon? Are they, do you know anything, are you talking to them a lot? Do you know anything about them? Are they ones that go to lots of your gigs? Are they sort of ones who are always in the front row?
That kind of thing, yeah. Well, like I say, like before I started Patreon, I was afraid of doing it because I thought these people will be creepy. It'll be creepy to be in contact with them. Like, I've had stalkers before and people that got too intense and stuff like that. But you can block those people if they're weird and they annoy you and they freak you out. And most people are not like that. So like the people who are like sponsoring me to keep making art and keep a roof over my head, more often than not, they're pretty similar to me. They just happen not to be making music in the way that I am. A lot of them are inspired by the way that I make music because it's quite unusual. It's all improvised, it's all vocal, it's all sort of technologically driven and stuff like that. Like, I'm making my own equipment to enable me to improvise mouth music in real time. That's intriguing to people and they like the music I make, and they're just people. Like, they're usually people of some means because they have some money that they can spend on leisure. So I guess it's not for everyone because people are feeling the pinch right now, but there are some people are still doing fine. So the majority of them tend to have like tech jobs. There's lots of developers, which is actually amazingly useful for me because a lot of the stuff I do, like my core competencies are not necessarily in software development, but I do software development. So they're helping me to continue to make technology so that I can make this music, and then they benefit from what comes out, which surprised me because I thought this technical tier, this like technical consultant tier that I made, I thought it was going to be me providing the value by doing Q&As, which I do, but the community itself, membership of that community it's a place where you find like-minded people and they're all helping each other and they're helping me as much as anyone else and they derive value from that. So there's something about Patreon which is not transactional and it's just about the goodwill, the good feeling that comes from contributing to the artists that you love. It's quite special.
What about Discord then? Because this is where I guess a lot of this interaction happens, right? So how fundamental is that as a sort of partner tool to Patreon?
Vital as far as I see it. I know that some people have a Patreon and they don't touch it. Like it's just a white page with a subscribe button.
Yeah.
And that's the extent of it, which is also fine because many people, I think, would not necessarily want to have their artistic process interrupted all the time by excessive amounts of engagement. And it does take time. But for me, like, I have two sides to my personality. There's one which is sort of boring and neurotic and studied, and that's me when I'm just on my own. And then there's this other side to me which is social and fun, and that only manifests when there's other people around, and it always manifests when there's other people around. So, like, I think most of us are that way to some degree. So for me, the community sort of having Discord there as a way to actually have this like party vibe at a moment's notice is just magic anyway. I mean, that's just something about Discord. Like, if you're a gamer and you're just playing Fortnite or whatever, you've got Discord for exactly that reason. But the same thing exists for me to get into a really nice mood and a flow state, because there's people around who they're directly interested in and benefiting from me being in like a sort of positive, creative flow state and allowing me to sort of make stuff. It took a while to get comfortable with that level of intimacy with anyone, to be honest, because I'd never let anyone into my studio. And so that was weird. But
I was
now
going to say, I've become addicted to
open
it. Here. Yeah, you're being open to allowing.
Yeah,
like you said, a lot of artists aren't comfortable with allowing the outside world into their. It's a very intimate process, but it is working for you clearly because you're making songs with them now. Yeah.
Well, if you're an artist, like you'll probably have that same problem that I was just describing, where like you might get a bit serious and you might get a bit solipsistic. Now, if you're the kind of artist who makes very serious solipsistic music, then that's a positive benefit. I like to do some stuff on my own, and I don't want anyone there for that. So that's a kind of flow state of an extremely personal nature. But when there's stuff where it's fun and it's funny and it's, then having people around for the creation of it, not just the consumption of it, or the performance of it, like, then it's definitely a positive benefit. It's a brand new world.
Yeah, right. And just to sort of wrap things up then, because there's a lot of really good ideas here. Is there a sort of fundamental piece of advice you would give to someone who's listening, or perhaps they're an artist or they're working with an artist and they're thinking about doing a Patreon? What would be your advice to them in terms of how they approach it and go about it?
I don't think I could give anyone any advice that exists outside of the best practices is provided in the Patreon documentation. My personal advice would be don't fear it, but also don't do it from your heart and do it with a lot of premeditation about how much time you are willing to give to any particular aspect of whatever the perks are that you're providing. Just make sure it's something you're comfortable doing, which I suppose that just stands to reason anyway. Just think it through, but don't be afraid of sort of opening up your processes to people, because that's part of the artistic offering these days. I think there's a reframing of what it means to be an artist now, where, like I say, there's a pedagogical element to it, and there's levels of openness which you're sharing, which you can monetize, and I don't feel that's mercenary, because in actual fact, fans really do want that. And I think that's opening up a bit and showing the sort of back end of your process is a small price to pay for having all the sort of the intimacy of a community and the financial remuneration that comes from it.
Great. Well, thanks for that. Well, look, I'm going to put links to your Patreon and your work next to the podcast. I'm sure people are hopefully going to be inspired to at least visit it and maybe even become a member as well and try and wangle their way onto a track that you're making. So, Beardyman, Darren Foreman, thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks for having me. Bye-bye.
And there we go. So if you found that useful, please share this podcast on with someone else who you think will also get something out of it. And if you'd like to email me and give me your thoughts, it's joe@musically.com. That's joe@musically.com. Don't forget, we have a free weekly email called The Knowledge, which rounds up a bit of this and a bit of that, of the best analysis, news, marketing, insight, and skills from Music Ally. There's a link below the podcast, so sign up and impress your boss. And don't forget as well, you can check out to see if you are eligible for a free Music Ally subscription. That link is also beneath the podcast. So that's it from me, Joe Sparrow. Until next time, farewell.